Cool. So, one thing I did learn is that this,
You'll know where it starts.
um, well, I know when it starts, but there's also this thing on the app that helps you go to the highest point and the other audio's highest point, and that's how you synchronize. If the AI, for some reason, can't figure it out, it's a whole science issue. It's crazy. All right, so what's up? This is the first time him and I are recording ourselves talking. We have a lot of conversations, but we're having this conversation today to kind of for many things, and I think it's going to be interesting to preface everything because I do think it's going to be the inception or the beginning of something like with Maddox, because one thing that I'm always thinking about is consistency for sure. That can go into different conversations, but I think the way that the instructors are teaching the masses in especially if it's 5 instructors, 6 instructors, we all have to kind of be saying the same thing. So it's interesting because with when I started training jiu-jitsu, I started really soon. I started a year and a half. I taught at FIU. A lot of people wanted me to teach, but I didn't know if I was capable of teaching. But something about it I loved doing. I did it. And then, but I was really teaching more for memorization. And then I was seeing that it was becoming troublesome because some people were not able to grasp and then they wouldn't progress and then they'll quit. And then later down the road, I went on a trip and I left somebody behind for a month to teach, and I kind of wanted to leave some sort of structure behind. So I kind of decided to leave, like, what do I talk about all the time? I talk about this thing called frames, hooks, timing, weight distribution. And so I kind of like laid it out and just like pick whatever your favorite techniques are, but try to talk about these things so that it's just not completely different while I'm gone, And then I don't know how that went, but I came back and I looked at it and I'm like, hey, this makes sense. So I started to do it myself. Started just kind of making sure everybody understood that they saw the connections, the frames and hooks, timing, weight distribution. And then it just evolved into that. And so I started kind of learning how to teach using those lenses. And it, to me, has helped me out a lot with teaching. And one thing that was very bothersome for me is every time I would say the word push or pull, which is the whole point of today's conversation. Back in the day, I noticed, and I don't know if you remember, but I used to say muscle a lot. So you can't muscle here, you can't muscle there. I've managed to stop saying that because somebody at one point of the journey was like, you're using muscle even if you do this. But that wasn't what I meant by muscle. I obviously meant when you're opposing somebody's force, so then I started using the word force. So you can't force things. And then what's a force? I would say, well, a force is when you're pushing somebody who's pushing you back, or if somebody's pulling you and you pull back, like that idea is forceful. So my idea is that absent of the resistance, and this is a little crazy, but I don't consider it a push or pull. I would consider it an extension or a contraction. And I find it interesting to have the conversation with you, Carlos, because in my journey, we met in college. He decided he wanted to come here and train jiu-jitsu. And then people after class would be going up to him, asking him for like little lessons on judo, and people would just be mesmerized by it. And I was like, that's cool, let's start a judo program. We started a judo program and I started it as well. And it was definitely very shocking. Not that I thought I was gonna be able to get it like that, but it was shocking how I was not able to translate my understanding from jiu-jitsu to judo. And so I had a lot of difficulty with that. So I just left my mind open, saying, this guy's been training since he was a young kid, doing judo, right? 7 or something like that. And he's been doing it his whole life. So like he has to understand something that I don't understand. I still believe that to this day when it comes to judo. But I was trying to see if there's any way that we can still convey what he's teaching with judo using the concepts, or is judo just something completely different that it can't use the concepts that we use teaching jiu-jitsu. So as I started getting better, and then sometimes he would teach, like, say for example, in Osotogari, this is a made up example, and then I wanted to teach Osotogari in my class to somebody else. I felt like I'm able to convey the very little I know about Osotogari using the concepts, and I'm like, this is interesting. I wonder if he understood what I meant by the concepts, if he'll agree that he can use this methodology of teaching and stuff like that. So I think over time you've kind of come to understand like, oh, frames and hooks make sense, timing makes sense, this and that, and then weight distribution. So like this is a hard conversation to hear if you're not experienced in one of the routes like judo or jiu-jitsu. But to me, everything in jiu-jitsu could be taught using the concepts of connection, which are frames and hooks. Important to define it for the sake of for this conversation. A frame is to prevent somebody from getting closer, a structure to prevent somebody from getting closer, and it's not to be mistaken with pushing. And a hook is a structure that prevents people from getting away, and it's not to be mistaken with pulling. Timing is how we react to push and pull. So our opponents, when they push on our structures, we cannot respond by pushing back. We have to respond by saying, hey, he's pushing, therefore he's opening these gaps in jiu-jitsu that I can access. And then we'll probably go into that more. And then the last concept was one that I don't even remember why I thought of it. Maybe it was the idea of judo, but weight distribution. And I remember when we started doing judo and he talked about kusushi, I was just like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's the same thing as like weight distribution, where if you're gonna do some forward throw, their weight has to be going forward. If you're gonna be doing a backward throw, their weight has to be going backward. So you have to either be able to tell where their weight is going, put them there, and if they don't let you put them there, they're opening something. But you can't force that if they're not giving it to you. That's where I would say that starts to go into the realm of pushing and pulling. So the point of today's conversation is that I think we can, this is just kind of like a fun conversation. I think that we already can get to the point where we agree and we can teach using the idea and almost like avoid using the word push or pull, like maybe, and then we'll understand it later. But then I think it goes outside the realm of jiu-jitsu as well. I think that the world has used push and pull so loosely that we kind of almost accept it as just the word, and it doesn't matter because it doesn't change our everyday lives. Like, so for example, if one of the examples I give is if there's a pair of keys on a table, you're not gonna ask somebody to pull those keys and give them to you. You ask them to grab it. And so like, but if the keys offered any sort of resistance, like it's moving away from you, you would have to pull the keys because it's going against this idea of bringing something to you. But it gets confusing because one thing that I have trouble explaining is like if you go to open a door that has absolutely no resistance, you're gonna tell the person to pull the door, but the door doesn't offer resistance. So it's just kind of like, I'm not willing to change that. We all understand it, but at the end of the day, the door's not offering any sort of resistive force, unless it's a heavy door, of course. So do we call the act of pulling something that offers no resistance a pull, and the act of pulling something that offers resistance a pull, or are they different things? And again, I don't think in the world it matters, but in jiu-jitsu it definitely does, because if I am to explain something in jiu-jitsu and say pull when I mean hook, which is just not letting them get away, people will do this motion of pulling, which is completely different than this motion of hooking. So there's where the terminology gets kind of confusing, and I'm not willing to give, at least not for now, concede that I won't use the word push or pull. I'll always use hook. And then I see some people trying to explain sometimes this idea of push and pull to other people who are white belts, and then I can see that it's confusing the white belt. So like it's or the newer rank, and they're kind of looking at him like, well, I thought Ricky said not to pull or push, and it gets very confusing. And we start telling them, oh yeah, we do push and pull in jiu-jitsu, and I'm saying we don't push and pull in jiu-jitsu. That's no matter what not gonna go well in somebody who's actually trying to understand what we're doing. So yeah, that was a long beginning to that. So I think that you're gonna, and I'm not saying that you have a stance, but you're gonna defend the idea that we absolutely do push and pull.
Yes. For the record, I think we're not debating the concept of how to perform, when it's correct or incorrect to push. I think we agree on that. I think this is basically a terminology thing, and this came about last week on Sunday, open mat. We were talking how would we teach judo, for example, using the three concepts Ricky just mentioned: connections, timing, and weight distribution. And when I was talking about, okay, my connections is my grips, once I'm ready, I am going to perform the Kasushia you normally would in judo. You're going to pull. And once I said the word pull, kind of, I feel like Ricky's alarms went off. He's like, what do you mean pull? And then we got into like, but we don't pull or push. And I was like, well, we absolutely do pull or push. And that's kind of like what sparked that conversation. So I really do think it's about how you perceive or interpret the word pull or push. I think Ricky just mentioned he believes pull or push is with force. So if you are just hooking something without resistance, the example he gave of the door, if you're opening the door and kind of pulling it, the door's not locked, the door's not, wedging against the floor. It's just nice and lubricated. It's opening towards you. It's not a pull. You're just hooking your arm, bringing it into your core. You were able to open the door. I agree with the term hook too. I think that's a hook. But essentially, my stance to just kind of kick things off is I believe every hook is a pull and every push is a frame, essentially. And that's because of my definition of pull or push. I think push, it's the exertion of force outward to keep something away. You're pushing something. And when you pull something, you're exerting force to get closer or bring it to you. So by definition, a hook and a frame are both either a pull as a hook and a frame would be a push.
Okay. And there is absolutely no direction to this conversation. So it could go off in tangent. And I just want to ask questions to kind of just see where it just takes us, So I want to know if you concede, because we have talked about this before, but you concede the idea that holding something up is not a push. Or do you think holding something up is a push?
Holding, like in your, like, are you talking about the example about hanging from a cliff?
That would be the opposite, yeah. So if I was laying down holding up a bench bar,
you're pushing.
I'm pushing as I'm holding it up.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you want me to explain why?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It comes down to we live in a physical world of forces.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we all know if I was benching, if I was laying on my back in a bench and I'm benching weight, I have the bar up, gravity is pushing downward times the amount of kilograms I'm holding up. That is the weight, right? That's why I can hold up maybe the bar, 45 kilos, no problem. But then you put, 3 plates on each side and I'm not going to hold it very long because the weight changes. But according to Newton's first law, because there is force coming downward, the only way I keep that bar in equilibrium without moving, it's not changing in position, I have to be exerting force to keep it up. So I am technically, by definition, exerting force upward, or in this case, outward, if you will, to keep the bar where it is. If I wasn't exerting force, the bar would come down. Gravity, that force would give.
So we can't see right now, but there's a phone on top of a table. So is that table constantly pushing that phone up?
Yes. There's tension on these, that's tension force. There's tension of these things. Think of a column on a building. The columns on the building are engineered a certain way to hold the building up, because that not only gravity times the weight of that building is pushing downward.
So, but there's nothing that the phone is doing.
Yes.
What is it doing?
It's the tensional force. We talked about the example of hanging off a cliff. So Ricky last Monday, and he got me good. He got me thinking, and this is where I dug a little deeper to really think. And now I'm even more firm in that position than I was of anything we've said, is that I basically am going back to physics. If I'm hanging off the cliff with my fingertips, no, I'm not pulling myself up. I'm just simply surviving, trying not to fall off the cliff. There is force pulling me downward, and that's the force of gravity, times my weight. That's what I need to exert to keep myself there. Otherwise, I would fall. For example, if I was unconscious, I would fall, because I can't grab the rock, okay? Therefore, I'm pulling myself. But then I thought to myself, okay, what if I was doing it with a bungee? What if I was sitting suspended with a rope? I'm no longer exerting force. I could technically be passed out with a harness. I'm now not pulling, but the rope holding me up is causing enough tension to counteract the force of gravity downward. So that's what tension force is. The tension of something. It's that force is pulling upward.
But the tension force you conflate with a pull.
It's just it's a pull. Tension is always a pulling force.
All right. So because that's so just to stay on, the phone is being pushed by the table, even though we wouldn't say it in everyday language. The phone is being pushed by the table.
That's the thing. I wouldn't say that.
All right.
But for the table to remain
But in the nitty
upright,
gritty of it, that's what's going on. The phone is pushing.
the phone
away
is
from
sitting on the table. The tabletop is being suspended or held up through 4 legs, and those legs are the ones responsible for the exerting the force up to keep it up.
Yeah, because another one that was kind of getting to me to think about is like when you're standing up, are you pushing yourself up the whole time?
Yes, you are.
So we're pushing ourselves up, sitting
Yes,
down
sure.
too.
That's why when you faint and you lose control of your body, people fall. Otherwise, I could stand up and stay. If I could lean somebody, say, okay, maybe you don't have the balance, but you can technically, if I was then passed out, I could lean you against the wall and you would stand. You can't. Your knees buckle, and that's because my legs, when I stand, are fully engaged and my core. That's why when someone stands for too long at work or something, you start getting backaches.
But the knees buckle
But the muscle's exerted. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to move. I'm exerting force to keep myself up. That's why your calves hurt, your thighs hurt. Things hurt when you stand for long periods of time. You're exerting force to keep yourself up because gravity's always pulling on you. Not to mention any other force you may be interpreting, like if you're walking uphill, downhill. All that is different forces work in different ways. There's always forces working against us.
So I think this would be a good part to introduce what I believe weight distribution to be, because when it comes to the whole balance thing, the most radical, and I'm not gonna die on this hill right now, but the most radical thing about my perspective is like I don't think extension and contraction is a forceful action. Like if you're able to do it, I don't think it's a forceful action. So like given everything you said now, this no matter what, even though there's nothing we're pushing, this is a push no matter what.
Yes.
Okay, because you're going against like wind or whatever, so like there is some sort of opposing force. But once there is a threshold where now that you can't do this any longer, so you have to engage your legs to start doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a different word for that?
No.
So if we were like, because I didn't even say what my most radical view is, but I don't think that push or pull is possible without a base.
I agree that.
Well, then we have to define base. Base is like when you have balance underneath you with your legs.
Okay. No.
Yeah, we don't agree on that. So, because you would consider laying down on a bench, pushing, you have a base. You think you have a base there, right?
Absolutely. When you're benching,
Yeah.
you're sitting on the bench. What would you say if you're like 8 feet tall on a pull-up bar? You can pull yourself up.
Yeah.
You're not a base. Your grip is your base.
Yeah, I would agree that pulling yourself up, you don't have a base. I think base is only like something that keeps you balanced.
Okay.
So I don't think
And
you can
I
have a
think
base absent of balance.
That's interesting. Thinking of that, I would say push definitely needs a base. If you want, I mean, we can measure how strong of a push, but a push needs something. You need to be structured.
That measuring thing that you just said, I think it would be, we can measure how strong an extension can be and a contraction, because it could be. It can't be any more than we can handle for sure. But the thing about a bench is that like for example, if we can imagine an upa, or not an upa, somebody on top of a mountain, they put their chest on us, on our arms. Mm-hmm. When I extend my arms, the person has to accept the extension because my arms are in the way. So he either has to let himself get away from me just as much as my arms extend, which would mean that I didn't push him. He moved himself away from me. Or he decides to push back on my arm. So I can't extend unless I engage in this forceful action that could be redirected. So if I start pushing something heavy and he moves my arms like this, the push never worked because it was never possible. So
that's right.
So what happens is that instead of using the forceful action, when I feel him resisting against these connections that I have, then I can shrimp away because he's pushing and he's busy. So something else opened up.
Totally agree.
A bench bar does not offer any sort of opposing force. It doesn't offer anything. Like, it's not going to trick you and go this way. It's not going to trick you and go that way. It's evenly distributed on your hands, which is why you don't fall one way or the other. Because if there was weight on one side, you don't have balance, so you're going to fall.
Right.
So like I can't argue that you have a base laying down. Like that part, I'm not. something that I would need to be a base. Just in its nature, is something that something can balance on. Like you have a
You
base for
don't
a
think
house.
we have a base when you're on the bench,
No,
bench pressing?
I think we have base structures, and we have structures that can help us create a base, but we don't have a base.
So what would you define? Having a base gives you what ability compared to having base structures?
To have balance.
So when you have a base, you have balance. When you have base structures, you can.
You have potential for balance, but you don't have balance yet. The same way you have potential to push, but you can't push yet, and you have potential to pull, but you can't pull yet. If we were sitting on our butts with our feet in the air and we had to knock each other back, why couldn't we do it?
Because we don't have something anchoring us to the ground like a base, I guess.
So in that example, I would argue that we would not be able to push each other. It'll just be kind of like we're just extending our arms, but we can't push each other.
Yes, see, but I think you're using the word push there out of the achievement of being able to like conquer the other person. A push is the action, not the outcome.
I would say not of conquering the other person, but being able to move them, like move their center, like
like roll them over, get them on their back.
slide them.
Okay, slide them, right? But you wouldn't be. I agree that you wouldn't be able to push them for this. What we're talking about, you don't have a base structure. I think in any push we do, and it's more so in push, pull, and pulling as well. But I think there's examples like hanging or climbing a rope or something where we do pull, but when we're talking to other people, you tend to have to anchor yourself. If I'm gonna do a good kisushi, I need to have my feet on the ground. I can't have them I can't be jumping and pulling. I can't. But I think you're saying you can't push someone. If we were both kind of playing guard here, like with our hands and knees up or hands and feet up, to push the other person, we wouldn't be able to. I could say you are pushing them. You're attempting to push them. You're not going to be able to like achieve what you're trying to do, which is to like get them to fall on their back or not. But I don't think that doesn't mean you didn't push them. You just didn't achieve what you wanted. I don't think the push is, like I said, the outcome. It's rather the action. Pushing is an action, not an outcome.
But I'm trying to define pushing as the action that like through force. You're moving something through force, like.
You are.
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah.
You're trying to, but in that case, you're not gonna. Your pushes aren't strong enough. That's like if you and I were grip fighting or doing anything in 10 feet of water where we don't reach the bottom. Our punches, our pushes, our pulls are nothing.
Our push is not strong enough.
The force, we're not generating enough force because we're not structured.
But when we bench something, we're generating enough.
We're
force.
structured on our back. We're pushing off. For lack of a better, we're not on the floor, but the bench is connected to the floor, and we are on our back. You can generate for the most part. Obviously, you don't have a space for the wings, but anybody that can bench 200 pounds on a bench can lay on their back and bench someone 200 pounds. You are pushing off the back.
Right,
now you can't float in water on your back and still do the benching of 200 pounds because you're basically your structure is your back on the ground. That's how you do, say, Tomoe Nage or anything. You're going to pass somebody over. The only reason I can pull you do that is because I'm on the ground.
You even more so can bench underwater.
No, I'm like on surface of water, not like the depth, with no structure.
Oh,
you can't bench if you're floating.
Yeah, because the weight will push you down. Like the weight will bring you down.
Well, yeah, the weight will sink you. But what I mean is you have nothing to push off. Like your body's not the base. You're pushing the bar forward. But you need to be structured or leaning against something that's going to hold you up to be able to generate that power. Because I think we're vessels of pushes and pulls. We're vessels of strength. Yes, we can work on our own. Some people can have stronger biceps than others. But the whole concept of jiu-jitsu, why a 170-pound person can easily, take care of a 200, 250-pound guy with technique and stuff like that, understanding that he doesn't have to rely on the strength, rather rely on the techniques around it. If it was a muscle game, it would just be the strongest guy wins. And you understand that, that's why you can do that. But, through your base structures and weight distributions and all the concepts in jiu-jitsu, you can do that. But to push and actually have any sort of progress in that push, you have to be structured to something. And in the bench, you're on your back. That's why you're allowed to push, or you're capable of pushing forward.
I would say that's why you're capable of extending, and I understand.
But you're pushing the bar.
But
if you were pushing, you wouldn't get muscles.
I would argue that you're not pushing because it's not offering an opposing force other than its own weight.
Like they would say in Spanish, te parece poco? Like it's the weight. Some people are benching 300 pounds.
But they're able to extend 300 pounds.
Because they're strong enough.
Yeah, like the same way, like when we do, like, but then you think this is a push.
And that is in the same case in jujitsu. If you put a force, a structure where maybe a person's not supposed to push that frame. Notice what we do in jujitsu is never go against that frame with 300 pounds like we would on the weight on the benching example. The alternative is always to find another way. We don't fight the push. In there, you're not. You're right. You're not fighting the push. That weight is coming down, multiplied by gravity, which is 9.81. What is it, man? Meters per second squared. I was looking into that when I was looking at the example of the cliffhanger. All that multiplication is coming down. I'll see all that weight's coming down, and you're just exerting force to bring it back up and bring it back down. But that definitely is coming down on you.
I don't argue that it's not coming down on you. I'm arguing that it's not offering any other force other than its natural weight. And
what other resistance can an object offer other than force?
Which is exactly why it can't push or pull you. That's the object is not pushing or pulling. It's just like there. Like I do you see how, like, with the example of the mounts, like when you extend your arms, like the guy would be wise to get his weight off of me, and or he just keep it just enough, but he won't engage his feet in pushing it, because if he engages his feet,
I think we're talking about two things. Obviously, now you're talking about strategy in jiu-jitsu and technique, where Tori, the guy on top, if I'm in the bottom and I'm trying to get this guy off of me and I'm pushing his chest, his abdomen out because I'm in mount, I'm just getting smothered. And this guy decides to like climb up or move another way or move my arms by moving his chest, throw my arms back. Now he's doing technique. He's using his brain. He's not just reacting force. The plates on a bar are just doing what they do. That's gravity. They didn't ask to be there. We're the ones that put them up. They're going to come back down. That's just the natural law of physics. In jiu-jitsu, we do play with the ideas of pushes and pulls, but we do it strategically, understanding the other concept of jiu-jitsu, understanding the technique, understanding weight distribution, understanding timing. Those are all kind of encompassed in one. But to make a point, when I frame, just like we were talking about, if I'm doing a push-up and I'm in a push-up position, so I'm fully erected, am I pushing myself up in a push-up position?
You're framing yourself up.
But there's weight, my weight and gravity's pulling me down. So technically, can I frame myself forever?
You can't, no.
Why?
Just because it's we have muscles, and our muscles can't, just like a table can hold itself forever because it doesn't have like muscle endurance. We have muscle endurance.
How would you define a push then?
The exertion of gravity's pulling us down, so it's offering the opposite, and we're going against that.
But aren't you technically going against gravity by holding yourself up in a push-up position?
No, because I'm not offering an opposing force. I'm staying stagnant.
But to stay stagnant, where's the force of gravity going?
It's still.
We know it's there, so where is it? If you're not moving, if gravity's not winning, you must be matching it. If you were winning, you're pushing gravity down. You're pushing the earth down, and you're not Chuck Norris. So if I think of it as a number line. 0 is equilibrium, is right and perfect. If you and I were doing stand-up and we had grips on each other and we were both pulling backwards, we would look like two people kind of in a V shape like that, really exerting force. If one of us is stronger than the other, one will start winning. Think of it as a tug of war. If we have the same strength on one side and the other, that rope in the middle will stay right in the middle. As some teams start winning or losing, you see that middle sway one way. That basically means one opposing force is superior to the other. As long as they're perfectly opposing, you will keep equilibrium, which is what we do when we hold ourselves up in a push-up position. Eventually, our muscles in our arms fatigue, and that's why we collapse, because our arms are collapsing. We can't hold ourselves anymore, and that's fatigue of muscle. Gravity, therefore, beats us.
Yeah, I get lost in these examples because we start using examples that are not jiu-jitsu. For example, like holding ourselves up on our hands, like, to me, is a weight distribution component for balance. Like, okay. So when we can, like, if we are holding ourselves up, we're deliberately like distributing our weight to our hands so that we can move our legs and things like that. And when it comes to, like, say I'm on the bottom and you were this is the part where I'm kind of like making sure I want to word myself correctly, because I think that you can push yourself sliding away by pushing off the floor and sliding away.
Like a shrimp. A shrimp is a push.
Yeah. So like, but like it's weird because then we're only like kind of like, no, not really. I take that back. I don't think we can push.
Is a
yourself.
shrimp a push?
I think no. It's an extension of your leg.
But you're pushing off the ground to move.
No, you're not. You're not. And honestly, when I teach people to do shrimps, I teach them not to push off the ground. I teach
How
them
do you move without pushing?
by
your
extending your leg, anchoring your foot and extending your leg.
But that is a push.
That's where we don't agree, and so
I think
like,
you're calling it something, but
no, but
you
that's-
just said it's an exertion
so,
of force.
So let's go to this example because I think it will help, and it will require. Hopefully, people can watch this. But like, let me grab your wrist, right? So, if I decide to hook, and without any extra force, because you would need your other hand to remove this grip.
Mhm.
I know some people are like, no, he has to go against the thumb, but even the whole thumb thing requires me to pull. So like if I pulled and he went against the thumb, he can release the grip.
Yes.
If I never pulled, he can never release the grip if he tries to. So like if you try, like not tricking, but like you just wouldn't be able to. You would have to create some sort of frame with your other hand,
Mhm.
so that now I can continue following you. So even if I tried to pull, like I wouldn't be able to. So
Right.
now, what would you tell this person when every time I pull my arm, I go like this, and you pull, and it's just like, and it's like, I
What
can't
am I-
figure it out.
what would I
You'll
tell
tell
him?
him to stop doing what?
I would tell them it's. So I would take. I understand what you're saying. Stop pulling would be what you're referring to. Stop pulling, but it's not just not pull. It's because when he pulls, he creates tension here
Yeah.
in the joint, and you could say our connection here. And when there's connection, I'm obviously going to exert force opposite to him to try to break that connection. Just like if I was loose and you want to keep taking me, you would hook and take me that way. As long as I'm letting you, you're going to continue going. So if I was loose, you'd keep going. You'd take as much as you can until you feel me stiff.
And I would argue that that's not a pull. I would argue.
But you are pulling me.
But
it doesn't feel. So go ahead and pull. I'm resisting. Go ahead and pull. What difference are you doing? The difference is
exerting opposite force.
you're doing the same thing with your muscle groups. The only difference is what I am doing on
No,
my side.
I'm not. Maybe the muscle, but that's funny. In the beginning, I was calling the muscle, but we use muscle for everything.
Okay, I'll give you an example.
But let's stick
add
with
to
this one. Let's
No,
stick
but
on this.
an example here.
Okay.
To illustrate this in a way where it's not, so I can the example. You are holding a rope. Consider this the rope, right? You're holding a rope. Here, by me exerting force, I have two options. I can exert force or I cannot. So I can be loose or I can be engaged. Okay? And you can even go into a third option where not only am I engaged, I'm savagely exerting force. So there's degrees to that. You're okay for the sake of keeping your connection. You're okay with hooking and bringing it into you, what you're calling a hook, which I call a pull.
And
You're okay.
I also call it contraction.
You're okay doing that as long as I'm neutral or I'm pushing.
As long as you're not offering opposing force.
Exactly, right. The moment I offer opposing force, you would still do the same. If the moment I offer opposing force, if you do the same action you did, you're jeopardizing the connection because there's tension.
Yes.
And tension means now there's a force going that way and a force going this way.
Yeah.
But you're doing the same thing. Me not resisting, hook, you're using the same muscle groups. The difference is what is the object you're trying to grab doing?
I'm not using the same muscles.
You are absolutely
You
using
have to
the
listen.
force is different.
Listen for a second.
Okay, but let me make a point. The force is different because at some point you're deciding to stop, and maybe you had to hold me a little tighter because I started earlier than you decided to stop.
I think a confusing part about that, before we move on with the example, because I think we can still move on with that example. The confusing part about that is that in jiu-jitsu, when you are using a hook or a frame, if the person decides to resist the hook or frame, if you continue in the act of stopping the person from resisting, you start also engaging in that forceful action. So it's not correct for if I do this and you decide not to let me contract my arm, for me to keep it there. I have to go on to something else. Because if you keep on trying to bring your arm back and I continue trying to do this, now I'm engaging and pulling. And now you can capitalize on that. So like, what's the difference? The difference is a different muscle group. This is just me almost like bringing my like lat back, and then the second you start pull, I start squeezing my fingers. They're completely different. They're not the same muscle group.
But no, I'm talking, yes, I think you're not understanding what I'm asking. If you were to hook me with no resistance, what's causing me to move that way is the muscle group. It could be some of your back, your bicep. Boom, that is what you're doing. The moment I resist, when what lets you know to check that is the engagement of that muscle. You just realize it and you understand it. Oh, this is not the way to go. This is wrong in jiu-jitsu terms. But basically, the only way you can pull me is this way. You're just deciding not to pull me because you understand you're going to jeopardize yourself by pulling me, because now you're applying muscle.
I wouldn't be jeopardizing myself if I was capable of off balancing you. I wouldn't be jeopardizing myself.
No, that's right. That's why there's occasions where you can push and pull in jiu-jitsu. If you understand the game of jiu-jitsu, you understand the scenarios.
Name me an example of when you can push or pull in jiu-jitsu.
If you were doing, you were rolling with one of the Megamatic students, one of the older kids, 13-year-old kids, they're maybe 120 pounds. You wouldn't do it. You're a black belt. I can say I was your weight. I'm a lot heavier, but I can muscle through them because of the superior weight. Muscling through someone works. Yes, it does. It's not proper technique.
I never argued that it
but I'm letting you. That's what I'm saying. Why we normally are somewhat evenly matched. Yeah. Even when we roll as a 170-pound person, right, and you roll with me, a 200-pound person, maybe even a 220, it's not enough difference in jiu-jitsu when we're on our back to really make a difference where muscling isn't going to get you out of it. But when you're talking about a 250-pound guy with like a 100-pound 13-year-old, it's enough. That person can literally plank them. Even, I don't care how stiff, or you could throw them around like nothing, because the force is so superior that they can't counteract it in any other way. Your base structure and frame is enough to get myself, a 200-pound person. You can frame me no problem. And even though I'm 200 pounds, I'm heavier, and I'm coming towards you with an acceleration and an added force because I'm pushing on you, you're still, I would say, structured and strong enough to push me away and keep me away. But you couldn't do that to a car. Can you frame a vehicle coming your way? Like the technical aspects of jiu-jitsu, you can do that to a train. You can do it to a bulldozer.
So the thing though, and I'm gonna use that example and the kid example that you're saying. The reason you can't muscle a kid, for many reasons, because it's a bunch of reasons, is because he does not know how to respond to the force. So if he doesn't know how to respond to the force and accidentally does what we do by nature and push back, their bones are a lot more fragile than ours. They can get hurt a lot easier than we can get hurt. So that's one of many reasons that you can't push. But I would argue that you can't do jiu-jitsu with a kid if you're pushing and pulling in general. The same way I would say you can't do jiu-jitsu with an adult if you're pushing and pulling. Well, you could do jiu-jitsu, but it wouldn't be the actual technical idea of jiu-jitsu, because I do believe pushing and pulling is in the realm of jiu-jitsu. It's just different, like strategy, survival, and stuff like that. But I guess we can talk about that later. But the idea of the car, if the car starts to push against our frames, we need to react immediately, otherwise we're gonna die. Like, you know, so same thing with a push when we're doing jiu-jitsu. If somebody's pushing on our structures and we respond by trying to extend our arms, not push back, but by trying to continue extending, now I'm opening the space here. And so the person on top, if he knows jiu-jitsu, can fill that gap. Right. It's not that I can't stop him from getting close to me, only so long. I can only extend for so long because my muscles are going to give out. But the act of me stopping you by extending is opening space.
I totally
But if I keep
that.
the space closed, then if you try getting close to me, like, I'm not ever pushing back, but I still got to move, because if you start pushing on this, I'm going to start doing this, and I'm going to start opening space.
Totally agree.
So you know, the idea that you brought up with the kid there is just like, I agree. Kids are even more so. You got to make sure to understand the difference between push or pull, or you should not be rolling with kids. And not even kids, women for that matter. A lot of girls don't like training with guys because they're weaker than the guy. And the thing is that both people don't understand jiu-jitsu so perfectly that they can avoid pushing and pulling. Right. But you get a girl to push a guy's push, chances are it's not going to go well for the weaker like vessel, you know?
I agree.
So it's just kind of like, there has to be, even though we can have this conversation for a long time, because, you know, you bring up some good points, there has to be a way that we distinguish forceful pushing from pushing that is not forceful in those terms.
I agree.
And there isn't a term for that.
No.
So it makes me the fun part is it makes me go outside of jiu-jitsu and wonder like, hey, are we possibly using the word push and pull incorrectly? And and I think we are. I think we are.
Going back to that, I like I told Ricky last Sunday when we first talked this, like, and we kind of just dabbled on the concept. We've gone more in depth now with examples, but I told him we can't hijack the word push and pull and say, no, this is what it means and this is what it should mean. What does the general public think it means? And like Google, it's an exertion of force if you're pushing and an exertion of force if you're pulling. Pushing is outward and pulling is inward towards you. It's an exertion of force. And that's my big concept there. I agree every aspect of jiu-jitsu you're talking about. When you push, you're creating space for the other person to progress in technique in jiu-jitsu. 100% agree. I'm not saying by standing here and saying that we push and pull in jiu-jitsu, by no means am I basically condoning the push and pull of the exertion of force in jiu-jitsu. Do it at your own will, because that will get you into trouble. But I do think a frame is an exertion of force outward, and it is by definition a push. However, it needs to be done with strategy. Why am I exerting this force? What am I waiting for? When he pushes back on that frame, I'm gonna slide the knee in, or I'm framing this arm, waiting for him to move him around and go into like octopus or whatever the case may be. When I was preparing and thinking more about this, I kind of went on a rant, started writing. I told Ricky before we started, I had a whole paper on Monday, the day after we kind of talked about it, and I came ready, like bullet points. And I quickly stopped after Monday night, and I was like, you know what, let me not. Because I felt like I was almost preparing for battle. Like, let me get all these bullet points ready just to like show why I'm right and he's wrong. And I wanted to make sure I come into it as open-minded with it, just to have a good conversation. So I kind of stopped really looking into it. And I've been thinking about it. I can't say I have, but I haven't really been like researching or doing this or doing that since Tuesday. Aside from thinking, okay, yes, by definition, I think push and pull are frames and hooks by definition. And that's just a technical definition. You can call me, I'm just technically saying it's technically a push and a pull. That's all I'm saying. Then I thought, it's like, okay, but what is it then? If I agree with Ricky that we shouldn't be pushing and pulling, so what is it that we're trying to achieve? And one thing I was thinking is, in jiu-jitsu, we are basically looking for the path of least resistance. So if I was trying to get up and you got in my way I'm not no longer going to push through you to get up. That's why we get up strategically, right? I get up backwards because you're not behind me to keep me. You're in front of me to stop me. Or I'm going to stand up and I underhook you because I can now weight distribute weight forward. So now it allows me to get up on my hand or my elbow. Things like that. We're looking for paths of least resistance. When we're framing or hooking or either or, once we feel that obstacle, you're going to do something else. So back to the example when Ricky's grabbing my arm, the moment he grabs my arm and he's hooking and he feels my resistance, he's not going to continue in this path. He's looking for another path with less resistance, because now this one offers more resistance. So if I'm doing this, he's like, I'm not going to keep going that way. If you're pulling that way, I'm going to move closer to you because that's less resistance than what he was offering before. So I think that's what we're doing in jiu-jitsu, but we're technically always pushing or pulling. In Monday's class, when we were still kind of like talking about it a little bit, we were looking at like sliding in from the Kimura grip, sliding into somebody's back when they move. And I would say you absolutely have to kind of like push yourself, or it wouldn't be a push, it would be a pull yourself in there. Because you can't even do that motion without the person there. Like if you didn't have a Kimura grip, you couldn't slide yourself up. And then I think your response was like, no, that person is pulling me onto them. And I would say, well, you're right, sort of, how you interpret it. If you do it with the proper timing, it all looks seamless. I get up, I get stopped, I can't keep moving, I can't put my elbow on the ground, and then you use that opportunity to go scoop and get your knee behind me. Could you do the same thing if I just stay in that position and don't pull, like I just sit up a little bit? You can still slide that knee behind me. So you don't need my force to do it.
You could,
and the reason is
it would be incorrect in my opinion.
I agree. Because you're at that point you're generating the resistance to go. And so while you're doing that, I can easily lean back and obstruct everything.
So in the beginning, because they're like the force, so because this may have to be continued, but the frames and hooks are always push and pull.
By definition.
By your definition, though,
Well,
respectfully.
exertion of force.
It's
Is,
not,
is,
but
is
that's
there ever
but-
a hook that doesn't have an exertion of
that's,
force?
and it's interesting. 'Cause then the next thing that you said, jiu-jitsu is always looking for the path of least resistance.
That's a thought that occurred to me. I'm not
I like
coining
it.
that
I-
term
I-
yet.
I like it,
but it is a
and
thought that it occurs.
I like it, and when somebody who is a white belt or a blue belt and hasn't gone really that deep in jiu-jitsu will look at it and be like, wow, that's really true. And in a way, it will kind of help them understand it. But I would say that jiu-jitsu is the path of no resistance, like absolutely none. And the only way you can tell is if your structures are trying to push. If you feel like your structure is trying to push, then that means you have to go towards the path of no resistance. And the reason there is a path of no resistance is because this person is deciding to push on your frame. So the frame is just the structure. It's not a pushing mechanic. It's just in the way. The second you push on my frame and I respond by going like this, I am no longer doing jiu-jitsu. I don't know what to do next. So therefore your muscle is going to work.
There's always resistance. Always. In a physical world, there's always resistance. I'll give you the same example.
I'm not gonna, but that falls into competition, and that's
Even in not competition, there's always going to be resistance. Always. For example, a common one in jiu-jitsu is like even as slight as like the friction resistance. For example, if I was doing a foot sweep on someone, even if the timing, the weight distribution, everything was right, that foot is causing friction on the mat. So for me to move it, there's a resistance. It's not much. It's not the same like if he was standing on that foot and all the weight was on that foot. That would mean as soon as I do the foot sweep, he wouldn't even move because that weight, that is anchored down. That has too much weight.
Yep.
But the proper time to do a foot sweep is right before he puts
because
it.
there's no resistance.
But there is a friction resistance. It's not enough. It's a resistance.
It's
a very minimal resistance
it's
where
not-
the action that you're causing is more forceful than the resistance posed by the object. So I'll give you the example. Justin was teaching Monday's class. We were doing that Kimura slide into back take. And then we were talking about turning the partner. You don't have access to get a bottom hook, so you get the top leg. You did the Kimura, you put the top leg. When you want to turn this person off this way, if I don't resist, I am still resisting. For you to put your leg inside my thigh and turn me to that side, there's still a resistance of weight.
I'm not turning you to that side. I'm not.
But you are absolutely.
No, I am only redirecting your push if you decide to push. If you choose not
If I choose to do nothing.
if you choose to do nothing,
If I'm like this.
I'm gonna attack your arm right there, and it's gonna hurt. And because
Wait,
you don't want it to hurt, you're gonna go like this, and you're gonna start pushing into me to survive, and that's what I'm gonna use to redirect. I'm gonna be redirecting your push
in a Kimura.
in a reverse triangle.
No, Kimura grip.
Yeah.
Kimura grip. You slid one knee behind, and you have this top hook
Yeah,
right there.
right.
So you have like my back.
Yeah.
So you're gonna progress to something different.
I'm gonna come up to mount.
Okay. If someone were to stick that top hook and try to like start taking the back, basically.
That's incorrect.
Okay, but see that's we go back to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Good. No, I know, but what I mean, let's talk about pushes and pulls specifically, whether they're right or wrong. Justin was showing an example where you get this top hook, and now you have a top hook, and this bottom hook is not in yet. So you always check that person by opening up their leg and seeing if they're willing to go this way. If they're completely neutral, doing nothing, they're just laying, it's easy to fold them over.
Why?
Because there's no resistance.
So then you're not really like pulling them. Like you're.
But of course, there's weight. I'm not moving myself.
There's not.
If I kick the ball,
Opposing force.
right now and it rolled, does the ball offer any resistance?
It depends on how heavy the ball is.
It's a soccer ball.
So you kick the ball. Is
I
it
kick it.
offering any resistance?
I kick it. Why does the ball stop?
Because
What stops the ball?
just there's no opposing force. Just nature.
No.
Just-
Why doesn't the ball stop in outer space? If I hit a ball in outer space, it never stops.
Because of gravity. Is
Well,
pulling it
gravity's
down?
one. It's friction resistance. As it's rolling, it's losing power
Yeah,
every
but
time
this
it
is
rolls.
where earlier in the conversation is like going into these examples, because there is no opposing force to a basketball that's being kicked and stopping. It's hard to understand the idea of push and pull, because it's just kind of like there's no, while the ball is stopping, there's no pushing or pulling happening. You think you're saying there's push and pull happening, but like like a shoulder roll and you're this whole conversation
Mhm.
is you pushing through the air to roll.
No.
But you're going in that direction. You're
Yeah,
going
but there's
against wind.
There's no wind. Wind resistance is not the same. We're talking the examples
It's
that
the
we're
same
giving
thing
is
as
gravity resistance. Gravity no. If anything, gravity's on my side when I'm doing the shoulder roll. I'm throwing myself forward, and gravity does the rest.
But I'm agreeing with that. But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is that the using gravity as the reason why holding a bar up is considered pushing is
Yeah.
the same thing as using wind as being the reason we're pushing when we're going like this, because we're going against like the force of wind, like we're pushing. But I argue that we're just extending our arms here.
You
Like
are
if I
extending, but-
extend my arms like this, like I'm just extending it.
What is the definition of a push? Exerting force. You said earlier.
No, exerting force against resistance.
Okay. What is the definition of an extension? How would you define an extension?
Absolutely, just bringing your arm out as far as you possibly can.
But you're exerting force. Your muscles have to exert force to do that. To move your skeleton in that position, you have to exert force.
But the threshold that I'm talking about
That's the
is
thing.
the resistance.
That's
but
the thing. How much resistance
The
then?
world may have not come up with an answer with it. You know, earlier I meant to mention, because earlier you're like, I'm trying to hijack the word. The thing about that is that I'm not the only person who tries to do this. Like the world has done it since its conception, and like because it's just the easiest way to get by at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think personally, like if there was a beaker and these chemicals and it starts fizzling and stuff like that, like we're gonna be, oh wow, look, bubbles. But a scientist would be like, what a fucking idiot, like that's not bubbles. What's happening is this and that and that and this. And so like they don't need to explain that. They would live their lives easier if they just say, yeah, that is bubbles. Like, you know, like it's because it's just kind of like we view it as bubbles and like we understand it to be bubbles, but it's so much more to that.
That's fair.
And so we have never ever needed to understand it on a deeper level unless you're in the field. And right now we're in the field of jiu-jitsu where we cannot use the word push and pull because it tricks the person's minds, because the world has made them believe that push and pull is always this, and it's just not. Like because sometimes we're hooking, and like the second that I go like this and then you start resisting, I need to go on to the next thing, because then if I start going further, that idea is like we can't call it anything else. Other than like saying, okay, push is a push, but if it's resisting, then it's a forceful push.
Okay.
And like so
That's right. Yeah, I get that. I agree with it's a terminology. Like I said in the beginning, I think this is a terminology conversation. We agree in everything, and we're using different examples, both in jiu-jitsu or like the soccer ball, different examples of physical world to try to see our points. But I do think it's a terminology, and I am basically saying, technically speaking, the exertion of force is the exertion of force, and that's what we call pulls and pushes. Now, how would you teach? Would you use the word push and pull with a child, teaching them jiu-jitsu?
only because the child is not capable of grasping onto concepts.
Exactly my point that I made last week. If somebody comes into that door, has never set foot on a mat, has never done anything like this,
This is a whole nother conversation.
it's totally
a good one.
true.
Though. It's a
So
good one to get into.
wouldn't our goal, and we said it, that we want to basically unify and align in the things, we want to be able to communicate an idea for people to understand it, so they can learn the hard part, which is the jiu-jitsu part.
Let me address this, because this is important. Because my goal when I'm teaching 5 to 9 year olds, let's just say a rough estimate, is not really to teach them jiu-jitsu. My goal is to teach them how to participate in a group activity, to follow directions, so that they can kind of do something that resembles jiu-jitsu. The second they start to turn 9 or 10, I can no longer start calling it push or pull, because their minds are starting to understand. So it's the same thing as like with an adult who's a white belt. I would be making a huge mistake calling it a push or pull, because an adult who comes to do jiu-jitsu is because he's trying to understand jiu-jitsu. So if I start saying push and pull from the beginning, like, oh, don't worry, he'll figure it out later, you're doing this person a humongous disservice, because later when you tell them, hey, by the way, push is not really push and pull is not really pull, they're gonna be like, what? And then when they're explaining it to people, or they're trying to explain it to themselves, they're like, okay, pull here, so, and they're not thinking about it as hooks or frames. So like, I'm willing for a white belt to be like, do I pull here? And I'll be like, isn't that a pull? But I understand why you're saying that, but I call it hooks, and he'll be like, okay. And then later on he will understand, but he never heard me call it push or pull. It's like talking to somebody who has an issue, like an alcoholic or something. It's you know what? I'm gonna give them this so that they don't feel like they're alone or something. Like, you know, they're depressed. We don't want them drinking, but I love them, so I'm just gonna go get them a beer, and it's just like I don't want them to do this, but I don't want them to like. It's just like you're not doing anything. You're just lying. Everything is just this made up thing that you think is gonna help the person overcome, and it's not. And this thing is the same thing with I'll probably get a lot of heat for that if I ever put that. But the idea with jiu-jitsu is that if you let the guy leave the door thinking he was pulling, when in your reality that was not a pull, it was a hook, it's going to be extremely confusing for him to understand the way you teach, because it's just kind of like he thinks he understands but he doesn't. So it's just kind of like I can't find a word to replace push or pull.
Why? Well, more to my point, if you can't find that word, why, instead of not using the word entirely, do we not associate more meaning to it of what it means here? For example, there's the word foul. Foul is a word in the English language, but the word foul has very specific meanings in basketball, has very specific and different meanings in soccer, has very specific meanings in football. They've all added meaning in their discipline what foul means, and it's an English word. You could say, oh, that foul smell. That makes no sense when you're talking about the NBA. It makes totally different sense when you're talking about football. And so why not say in jiu-jitsu, pushes and pulls have to be done this way, like what we've been going back and forth all the times. If you push and exert too much force, they're going to get in on you. You have to do it this way, through frames. And not so much focus on the vocab that we're using, rather the concept of why it should be the way it should. For example, this sport transcends many cultures, right? I'll give you an example of judo. I can go do judo in Japan and we don't speak the same language, and I could probably still learn from someone, not necessarily verbally speaking, but showing me concepts and things, and I don't have to get caught up in a word. I'm not necessarily misunderstanding in a word.
Yeah, the point of the conversation is because I wasn't taught with this, and I think I've gotten to this point. But that is an individual. Like, I chose in my life to pursue jiu-jitsu. I never really had another job. I had one other job that I can think of, maybe two, right? And I chose to do this. So at some point, I'm gonna run into this. My goal is, when I'm teaching people, to make sure that they have the most chances of running into what I ran into. So like the goal is to like convey something so that they can, like, one of the biggest problems with jiu-jitsu is that people don't see themselves progressing. And that's a humongous thing. And that is completely not up to the student. It's up to me to be able to tell whether you're progressing and be able to explain to you why you're progressing. So like if we have this understanding of like, oh, this is a marker of how I'm getting better, then it makes them more excited because they can see results. It's not like muscle where you can see your bicep and like, oh, okay, I can see results. Like, it's going on in your head. And so like what happens is that when they start understanding it through like, oh, like this is why I find it important to go like deeper with push and pull, because it's just such an interesting concept. But at the end of the day, like when explaining it in jiu-jitsu, just understanding why Ricky doesn't want to use the word pull is important. But if I say, for example, because foul, I don't know what the word is, if it's homonym or something, but when words have different meanings, I don't think this is the same thing. I think push and pull, I'm using the same meaning that the world uses. It's just the act of like, you pull something that's offering like opposing force. Like, I would almost like argue, because I was thinking about
opposing force, or you pull a door open.
I would say a force, an extension of your arm is forceful, but it's a forceful action that's not receiving anything opposite to it. Like, it's a forceful action going that way.
Depends when.
Depends.
If you're framing off of someone, if somebody's coming, you're going to frame off of them, that resistance goes there. The point is, at that moment, when you feel that resistance, you don't keep going that way. You now come this way or go another way.
Yeah, because if not, then you would be engaging in, you would be opening space. That you would be allowing their push to work.
Okay, I agree. But you, even the slightest frame, like even if I kept going, you did nothing and stayed there and slid away, the only way this is not buckling and your arm is not contracting is because you're exerting force outward. It's just not enough to counteract my weight. That's why you're sliding backwards.
But the reason I'm sliding backwards is because you're pushing me away.
Yes, but if it's this arm too. If this arm wasn't stiff and exerted.
But the arm itself had no potential of pushing myself away if you took your weight off of me.
The arm itself had no. Say that again.
The arm itself has no potential to slide myself away if you took your weight off of me.
Correct.
Like, you know, you
That's
can
correct.
still have your weight like hovering on the surface, but like if I go like this and I try to slide myself away, if you push into me, I can use your arm to extend myself away from my body.
Right.
So like I would argue that that's correct technique. But if
Right.
I start trying to push you away from me and you take your body away from me and I go like this, now I'm just opening space.
Correct.
It's not because I pushed you, it's because I extended my arms.
Okay.
If I pushed you, it would feel something was opposing
I
it.
think there has to be what comes next. There's all degrees of pushing. I mean, if not, we would say, like we talk about weight. Weight is basically the measuring of gravity pushing downward on a mass. That's why I weigh more than you weigh, because I have more mass, and we step on a scale and you measure it. We would never be able to do weight without gravity. We take a gravity because everything comes down. Now, push has to have a level, and we push force. We measure force in newtons. We measure the force of something. You can measure something could be forceful. Someone's, we're punching a bag or something, or kicking a bag. The force of that kick, someone's kick is stronger than the other person's kick. They did the same exact thing, but they're all different. So the level of force is important.
But every example you just gave, the thing that you're touching is not offering any resistance back.
In which example?
Like a kickboxing bag, like you can kick a bag as hard as possible. It's not resisting you. But if the kickboxing bag resisted you and you tried kicking it, that's gonna be a problem.
Okay. If I am walking onto you and I'm coming forward and you're like playing open guard, you're here and you frame me and like you're sliding back because of my push, you are resisting.
I am, and I would argue in jiu-jitsu that's incorrect.
Okay, but regardless the point, but like even for the slightest second that you may do that before you decide to do something else, you are resisting. Even if you're sliding back, you would be more resistful if like you kind of like try to push back. That's more resistance on me. What I would argue there, you don't have the structure.
I'm resisting by keeping my arm extended.
So So because you're resisting, you're exerting that force outward.
I don't know if I would say I'm resisting.
You're pushing.
I'm not doing jiu-jitsu.
But we're talking about pushing and pulling, and we are talking how it relates in jiu-jitsu. But I'm coming from the physical world of what a push and a pull technically means.
If you're sliding me away, it's you who's pushing, and I'm creating the structure that can be pushed.
If I don't run you over, if I push you and you're moving, and you're sliding and creating the same distance between the palm of your hand and your chest, and that doesn't change, you're responsible for that. I'm responsible for the force I'm putting here. You're responsible for from there on. I have no responsibilities to keeping your arm straight. The reason it stays straight is because you're exerting force.
I think
that's the same thing as a push-up position. If you were in a push-up position on a plane, and the plane took off and you stayed on that push-up position, the plane didn't keep you up. You're staying up because of your arms exerting force downward. The base around you is moving. What you're pushing downward on is, you're responsible for that. But you're not responsible for the rest of the movement, because the plane took off. The plane is moving you around, but you're still responsible for keeping yourself up in that plank, in that push-up position. That's what I'm saying. If I frame you, I'm responsible for the force I'm putting on you. You're responsible for keeping this frame active and engaged, or buckling, or moving, or whatever. And that is an exertion of force. Therefore, technically speaking, it's a push. I'll simply, if we weren't talking jiu-jitsu, if we got a physicist to come here, a physics teacher, and explain jiu-jitsu, explain it to me, what's happening.
It would have to be a really smart physicist, because I think a lot of people are stupid.
Nah, come on. Oh yeah, physicists are dumb?
The ones that are being taught today, I think.
Explanation of forces, simple explanation of forces. Forces are exerted. If not, we wouldn't be able to propel ourselves in the world. We wouldn't. You couldn't walk, you couldn't slide, you couldn't guard any position. You have to exert force to move around. And any force you're doing with a hook, you're pulling.
I think it's the
when you underhook, you're pulling yourself in.
No, you're not.
You absolutely are, sir.
You're absolutely not.
Technically speaking.
No, you're not.
You absolutely are,
You're
sir.
putting a structure in the way, and then this is where like it gets a little confusing. And this is where I would imagine you would be able, like, if I had the knowledge to talk about judo the way that you did, you'd be able to understand a little bit more where I'm coming from, because I'm almost unfairly bringing up jiu-jitsu examples with 15 years of non-stop jiu-jitsu.
No,
and it's hard to explain, but like an underhook for example, since that's the one you brought up, it's just to tell whether or not you decide to pull on my arm or not. And if you decide to pull on the arm, there's these things that I can do. If you choose never to pull up on my arm, I'm not forcefully like keeping myself connected to you. Like what's going on is that my knee is driving you to your hand. So my knee driving you to your hand, right when you stop it, I can't continue going because I'd be pushing. So I'm
Right.
going to keep it there just in case you try to push on it. And if you try pushing on it, now I know I can come up on my elbow. So it's the slightest,
Right.
like once I feel you resisting, the next move is
But
available.
even the slightest bit is a push or a pull.
But,
And I think
the slightest bit is connection. And
Well,
that's the difference between a hook and a frame and a push and a pull. The word that I want the world to give push and pull when there's no resisting is frames and hooks. Like use
and I'm
let's use fishing for example.
Uh-huh.
Like if you hook a fish,
Mhm.
like the hook is not pulling the fish. The hook is just grabbing onto the fish.
because it's the physical hook, but there's tension on the line. That's why the tip of the rod bends.
Yeah, but
The fish doesn't want to come on board, and the rod bends. That's tension. That force is called tension.
right, but
Uh-huh.
but
And you bring him in when you reel. You're beating the fish. That's why when you hook a marlin, you have to fight the sucker for an hour to tire him out because you cannot bring him in. You'll pop the line.
You would. I don't fish, so this
Okay.
can sound stupid, but I would imagine that if the fish is giving me trouble, you're gonna let it swim until it gets tired, and you
Correct,
reel. Once
correct.
it starts resisting, you stop, and then once it stops again,
Well,
you resist.
yes, you can. If you don't stop, you jeopardize. You put too much tension because now you have the fish swimming that way, and you have your reel getting it this way. You're putting a lot of tension on the line. That's when the line snaps. The correct thing to do as a fisherman is let the fish run. It's hooked. It's hooked. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, but that didn't change the definition of the hook. The same way your bones will snap if you try to extend something that's heavier than you're capable of extending. If you try to extend your arm more than it's capable of doing. I think that like it's crazy how like if we do like this, our chest gets hard, and then if
Because
we
you're
go like
exerting force.
and if we go like this, our back gets
And
hard.
you're
right?
exerting force.
And the thing is that because those muscles are like capable of doing that, which
Mm-hmm.
is remarkable, but it can't go and it cannot do it if you start to apply opposing force. And it's interesting because I want people to listen, but I don't want it to get too long. I don't think we finished this conversation.
And you just scratched the surface.
Yeah, honestly, and I'm willing to have this for the rest of my life. To be honest, it's fun. But the idea of this, I think, is very important because I think when people do the reason why do people? I cannot imagine joining jiu-jitsu not expecting yourself doing it for a long time unless you truly had no clue what you're getting yourself into, right? So when people join jiu-jitsu, it's because they see potential of this being something that they can make part of their lives. They're right about that, but they have absolutely no clue what they're getting into. The same way a white belt has no clue what a blue belt is supposed to mean. If you knew what a blue belt was, you're probably a blue belt at that point. Like, you know, like, so like I don't agree with telling people a certain way you can meet blue. It's like, no, just train. I know a lot. You believe I know a lot. Trust me. I'm gonna try to give it to you, but it's a whole entire process. It takes a long time. But because it takes a long time, there's so much room for something to happen in between. And one of the most common ones is injury. And when you are conflating the idea of frames and hooks with push and pull, that is why injuries happen. Like flexibility in itself is like the furthest point you can go to your body starts resisting on its own because it can't go any further. So you start resisting. So if you go more than your body can and your body's trying to tell you stop, then like it's gonna snap. So like I think injuries happen like when people they make mistakes. Like if somebody tries to frame somebody who's coming towards them and they're too heavy, so they put their hands in the way and the body weight goes here. Like we were not supposed to frame that. That's too heavy. So we got to use a different structure. And it can break. So like I feel like when people don't distinguish the difference between frames and hooks and push and pull, their chances of getting injured increase significantly. So because I've come to that realization, I find it to be important to, I don't know how quickly it'll get them to understand it, but that's the direction we need to go towards. We need to understand the difference between push and pull and hook and frame, so that we can lessen the chance of something that can get in the way of you doing jiu-jitsu for a long time. So just like this conversation, regardless of it not ending, I find it important because no matter what, us trying to come into the truth about it is only going to help people who are trying to understand it themselves. Like even if it gets to at one point, I'm like, oh shit, like you're right, you know. And if I did jiu-jitsu for 15 years and I can't see it, and then you can get me to say that I'm right, it's just like, man, it's either that I'm like not a smart person at all, or somebody else is going through the same thing, and they're like kind of like not understanding push and pull, and like they were seeing it from how I was seeing it, but if I was corrected, now they can see themselves getting corrected too, or vice versa, you know. It's confusing, but I think it is important for us to understand this. But regardless, the way that we teach in jiu-jitsu here, and it doesn't have to be, I would hate for the instructors to teach something that they don't believe in, which is another reason why I find this conversation with you and I important, because I would like for you to teach and avoid using the word push or pull, but I wouldn't like it if you didn't agree with it or understood why I wanted you to avoid using it. Yeah,
That makes sense to me. I really think it's just a language thing.
yeah.
But I do agree the importance of unifying everyone's language, at least all the instructors, to try to create the easiest and most digestible lessons for especially the new people, the ones really brand new to jiu-jitsu that may have not done anything in the past, to obviously get them to progress as quickly as they can by just understanding the concepts and the lessons quicker, and obviously the avoidance of any injury or even that just frustration. They probably perceive a frame and they're always pushing off that frame rather than framing, and it never works, and they're like, why doesn't it work? And they just think I suck at this, and they don't go forward.
And something else why I'm so strong in this belief is because, man, it's happened enough times where maybe, you know, I somehow end up on a mat with somebody else who's not my student, and I start explaining the tiniest idea about frames and hooks, and it happens literally all the time. Doesn't matter whether people believe me or not, but they're always like, what? Like nobody's ever explained it like that. And it's just like, yeah, because it's not an easy thing to understand. Like in my opinion, it's not an easy thing to understand, and it resonates to them, and they're like, and they'll come to me weeks later, I promise, and they'll be like, hey, that thing you told me the other day, I started using it, and now like I'm opening everything. And then they will say certain things, I'm like, that wasn't right, but I'm glad you're thinking about it now. Like I'm glad you're like your brain is starting to head in the let me try to make sense of this. Like, you know, because jiu-jitsu is so complicated. If you try to like just surface area memorize technique, you've already been doing it long enough where you can distinguish people who don't try to understand and just try to memorize. They're very unpleasant to roll with. They're very injury prone themselves. They're very prone to injuring others. They're very like kind of like hard to roll with, hard to talk to. It's like, so it's very interesting. I just as an instructor try my best to get to the bottom of that. So yeah, cool, awesome. I think
Good
that was
talk.
I think that was great. I think it went like almost better